The gunshots rang through the clear Montana morning air as Quinn Rayburn practiced his aim in the yard behind his weathered ranch house, a ritual he'd maintained every day since returning from the war 3 years ago. At 32, he was known throughout Willow Creek as a man whose hands were too calloused for tenderness, his voice too harsh for comfort, and his demeanor too severe for the raising of children, especially the 2 little girls who'd been thrust into his care following his brother's sudden passing. The year was 1875, and the Montana Territory was still wild in parts, though civilization crept steadily westward with each passing season. Quinn holstered his Colt, surveying the vast expanse of land that stretched before him. The Double R Ranch had been in the Rayburn family for 2 generations, and now it fell to him alone to maintain it, along with raising his nieces. 5-year-old Sarah with her golden curls and 3-year-old Emma with her father's deep brown eyes. "Uncle Quinn," Sarah's voice called from the porch. "Miss Patterson is coming down the road." Quinn squinted toward the dirt path that led to town, spotting the approaching buggy. Nancy Patterson was the town's schoolteacher, and her weekly visits to check on the girls' welfare had become as predictable as the sunrise. The town council, concerned about 2 young girls being raised by a former cavalry officer with a reputation for hard drinking and harder fighting, had appointed her to ensure their well-being. He straightened his worn leather vest and ran a hand through his dark hair, knowing full well he looked every bit the rough cowboy people whispered about in town. The scar that ran from his right temple to his jawline did nothing to soften his appearance. "Sarah, go inside and make sure your sister is presentable," he instructed, his voice carrying the gruff edge he couldn't seem to shed. The little girl nodded and scampered back into the house, her bare feet pattering across the wooden porch. Quinn took a deep breath, steeling himself for another of Miss Patterson's judgmental assessments. Nancy Patterson guided her horse to a stop in front of the Rayburn home, eyeing the bullet-riddled targets with disapproval. At 25, she was Willow Creek's newest schoolteacher, having arrived from Boston just 6 months earlier. With her chestnut hair pinned neatly beneath her bonnet and her sensible blue dress, she embodied the propriety the frontier town aspired to achieve. "Mr. Rayburn," she greeted him coolly as she descended from her buggy. "Miss Patterson," Quinn replied, tipping his hat slightly, "right on time as usual." "Punctuality is a virtue worth teaching," she replied, gathering a small bundle of books from her seat. "I've brought some primers for Sarah. She's at an age where her letters should be practiced daily." Quinn nodded, though his jaw tightened. These weekly reminders of his inadequacies as a guardian grated on him. The girls are inside, they've been fed, washed, and their chores are done. Nancy's eyebrows rose slightly. "Chores, at their age, small ones," Quinn defended. "Gathering eggs, helping with dishes builds character." "I suppose," Nancy said doubtfully, moving toward the house. "And their education, have you been reading to them as I suggested?" Quinn remained silent, holding the door open for her. The truth was that most evenings found him exhausted from ranch work, and reading children's stories wasn't something that came naturally to him. He'd tried once, his deep voice stumbling over the words of a fairy tale, until Sarah had gently taken the book from him and pretended to read it herself, making up a story from the pictures. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly tidy. A pot of something simmered on the stove, filling the air with the scent of beef and vegetables. The girls sat at the rough-hewn table, dressed in simple but clean dresses, their hair neatly combed. "Miss Patterson," Emma cried, sliding from her chair and running to the teacher. Her little arms wrapped around Nancy's skirts as Sarah followed more sedately, offering a small curtsy that Quinn had never taught her. "Good morning, girls," Nancy smiled, her face softening as it always did when addressing the children. "I've brought you each something." She handed Sarah a primer and gave Emma a small rag doll dressed in a calico dress. The younger girl's eyes widened with delight as she clutched the toy to her chest. "What do you say?" Quinn prompted from the doorway. "Thank you, Miss Patterson," both girls chorused. Nancy glanced around the cabin. Despite Quinn's efforts, it lacked the feminine touches that made a house a home. The walls were bare save for a rifle mounted above the fireplace and a faded map of the territory. The furniture was functional rather than comfortable, and the only decoration was a small vase of wildflowers the girls had likely gathered themselves. "Mr. Rayburn, might I have a word with you in private?" Nancy asked after spending an hour with the girls, reviewing Sarah's letters and playing a counting game with Emma. Quinn nodded, leading her outside to the porch while the girls remained inside with their new treasures. "I'll speak plainly," Nancy said, her voice lowered but direct. "The town council is concerned. It's been 6 months since your brother and his wife passed, and while the girls appear physically cared for, they need more than food and shelter." Quinn crossed his arms, leaning against the porch post. "And what exactly do they need that I'm not providing?" "Gentleness, guidance, a woman's influence." Nancy met his gaze unflinchingly. Several families in town would be willing to take them in. A flash of anger crossed Quinn's face. "They're Rayburns, they stay with me." "Mr. Rayburn, with all due respect, you're a bachelor who spent years at war. You run cattle and break horses for a living. Your reputation in town, my reputation doesn't define who I am to those girls," Quinn cut in, his voice dangerously quiet. "They're my blood, my responsibility." Nancy sighed, adjusting her bonnet. "The council has given me until the harvest festival to assess whether this arrangement is truly in the girls' best interest. That's 6 weeks, Mr. Rayburn." Quinn's hands clenched into fists. "And if you decide it's not, then legal measures may be taken to place them with a more suitable family." Nancy's expression softened slightly. "I don't doubt your intentions, but raising young ladies requires skills you may not possess." After Nancy departed, Quinn stood on the porch watching her buggy disappear down the road. Sarah came to stand beside him, her small hand slipping into his. "Is Miss Patterson mad at you, Uncle Quinn?" she asked. Quinn looked down at his niece, her face so like his brother's it sometimes hurt to look at her. "No, Pumpkin, she just wants to make sure I'm taking good care of you." "You are," Sarah insisted. "You make the best flapjacks." Despite himself, Quinn smiled. "That might be the only thing I do right." "That's not true," Sarah said with the certainty only a child could muster. "You keep the monsters away at night, and you always know when it's going to rain." Quinn knelt down to her level, something he rarely did. "Sarah, do you and Emma like living here with me?" The little girl nodded earnestly. "This is our home. Mama and Papa are in heaven, but they'd want us to stay with you." Quinn swallowed hard against the unexpected tightness in his throat. "Some folks in town think you'd be better off with a proper family, with a mother and father." Sarah's eyes widened in alarm. "But you're our family." Her bottom lip trembled. "Don't you want us anymore?" "Of course I want you," Quinn said fiercely, gripping her small shoulders. "You and Emma are all the family I have left. I'm just not very good at being what you need." "You're what we need," Sarah insisted, throwing her arms around his neck. Over her shoulder, Quinn caught sight of Emma watching from the doorway, clutching her new doll. Her eyes held a wariness that no 3-year-old should possess, the wariness of a child who had already lost too much and feared losing more. That evening, after the girls were asleep, Quinn sat at the kitchen table with a bottle of whiskey and a worn leather journal, his brother's diary. James had always been the thoughtful one, the brother who could express his feelings. Quinn had been the fighter, the protector. "What would you do, James?" Quinn murmured, tracing the handwriting with his fingertip. "How do I raise your daughters to be proper ladies when I can barely remember to watch my language around them?" The next morning brought new challenges. Emma woke with a fever, her little body burning hot as she cried for her mother. Quinn's heart raced with panic as he placed cool compresses on her forehead and tried to coax her to drink water. "Sarah, I need to get the doctor," Quinn said, lifting Emma in his arms. "Get your shoes on." They rode into town with Emma wrapped in a blanket against Quinn's chest, her feverish whimpers cutting him deeper than any knife ever could. The town of Willow Creek consisted of one main street with various businesses lining both sides: a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, the schoolhouse, and Dr. Walker's office at the far end. As Quinn carried Emma down the street, he was acutely aware of the stares and whispers of townspeople. His reputation preceded him. Quinn Rayburn, the quick-tempered cowboy who'd once broken a man's jaw in the saloon for cheating at cards, now carrying a sick child as tenderly as he could manage. Doctor Walker diagnosed Emma with a simple childhood fever and provided medicine, assuring Quinn it wasn't serious. As they were leaving, Quinn nearly collided with Nancy Patterson on the boardwalk. "Mr. Rayburn," she said, her eyes immediately going to Emma's flushed face. "Is she ill?" "A fever," Quinn replied tersely. "Doctor says she'll be fine with rest and medicine." Nancy reached out to touch Emma's forehead. "Poor dear, I had planned to visit tomorrow, but perhaps I should come today to help." Pride warred with practicality in Quinn's mind. He knew little about caring for a sick child, but accepting help felt like admitting failure. "We'll manage," he said finally, Nancy's lips pressed into a thin line. "Mr. Rayburn, there's no shame in accepting assistance. This isn't about your capabilities, it's about Emma's comfort." Before Quinn could respond, Sarah tugged at Nancy's skirt. "Please come, Miss Patterson, you could read us stories while Emma gets better." The hopeful look on his niece's face crumbled Quinn's resistance. "Fine," he conceded. "If you're willing." Nancy nodded. "I'll gather some things and follow you back to the ranch." By the time they reached home, Emma's fever had spiked higher. Quinn paced the small bedroom as Nancy prepared a mixture of willow bark tea for the child. "She's burning up," Quinn said, his voice rough with worry. "Maybe we should take her back to town." "Let's try this first," Nancy suggested, sitting on the edge of Emma's bed. "Emma, sweetheart, can you drink this for me? It will help you feel better." The little girl whimpered but allowed Nancy to help her sip the bitter tea. Quinn watched from the doorway, feeling helpless in a way that war and ranching had never made him feel. "You've never seen them sick before?" Nancy asked quietly as Emma finally drifted to sleep. Quinn shook his head. "James and Catherine died in that influenza outbreak last winter. By the time I got back from the cattle drive, they were gone, and the girls were being cared for by the pastor's wife. They've been healthy since they came to live with me." A flash of sympathy crossed Nancy's face. "I remember the outbreak. We lost 8 people in town." "9, Quinn corrected harshly. "My brother and his wife make 9. Nancy changed the compress on Emma's forehead. "Sarah mentioned you fought in the war." Quinn nodded stiffly. "Cavalry, 8 years. That explains much of your—" She trailed off. "My what, Miss Patterson? My roughness. My unsuitability for raising young ladies." Quinn's voice held a challenge. Nancy met his gaze steadily. "I was going to say your self-sufficiency and your reluctance to accept help." Quinn looked away first. "I'll make coffee," he muttered, retreating to the kitchen. Nancy remained at the ranch through the afternoon and evening, tending to Emma while also helping Sarah practice her letters. Quinn kept his distance, handling the outside chores and checking on them periodically. As darkness fell, Emma's fever finally broke, and the little girl asked for water in a weak but clear voice. "She'll be fine now," Nancy assured Quinn. "Children bounce back quickly. Just keep her drinking fluids and she should be her old self in a day or 2. Quinn walked Nancy to her buggy under a sky scattered with stars. The night was cool, and he noticed her shiver slightly in her light shawl. "Here," he said gruffly, removing his jacket and draping it around her shoulders. Nancy looked surprised but didn't refuse the gesture. "Thank you. And thank you for allowing me to help today." "I should be thanking you," Quinn admitted reluctantly. "I wouldn't have known what to do if that fever hadn't broken." "You would have figured it out," Nancy said. "You're more capable than you give yourself credit for, Mr. Rayburn." Quinn helped her into the buggy. "It's a long ride back to town in the dark. You sure you don't want to stay until morning? The girls' room has an extra bed." "That wouldn't be proper," Nancy replied, though she seemed touched by the offer. "Besides, I have classes to teach tomorrow." As she gathered the reins, Nancy hesitated. "Mr. Rayburn, Quinn, I want you to know that, despite my reservations, I can see how much you love those girls. I'll make that clear in my report to the council." Quinn nodded, unexpectedly moved by her words. "Good night, Miss Patterson." "Nancy," she corrected with a small smile, "if we're to be on a first-name basis." As her buggy disappeared into the darkness, Quinn returned to the house, checking on Emma, who slept peacefully now, her fever gone. Sarah had fallen asleep in a chair beside her sister's bed, a book open on her lap. Quinn carefully lifted his older niece and placed her in her own bed, then took the chair himself, determined to watch over Emma through the night. The next morning, Quinn woke with a stiff neck from sleeping in the chair. Emma was sitting up in bed, looking much improved, while Sarah was nowhere to be seen. "Morning, sunshine," Quinn said, reaching over to feel Emma's forehead. Feeling better, Emma nodded. "Is Miss Patterson still here?" "She went back to town last night," Quinn explained, helping Emma out of bed. "Where's your sister?" "Making breakfast," Emma said, slipping her small hand into his. "She said to let you sleep 'cause you were worried all night." Quinn found Sarah standing on a stool at the stove, carefully turning bacon in a cast-iron skillet. At 7 years old, she was taking on responsibilities that no child should have to bear. "Sarah," Quinn said gently, "you don't have to cook breakfast." "I wanted to help," she replied, not taking her eyes off the bacon. "Miss Patterson showed me how to do it right yesterday." Quinn felt a pang of guilt. "From now on, you wake me up. Cooking is my job, but you do everything else," Sarah protested. "The ranch and the horses and chopping wood." Quinn lifted her down from the stool, taking over at the stove. "That doesn't mean you have to be the woman of the house, Sarah. You're a child. You should be playing and learning." Sarah looked up at him with eyes too serious for her age. "But who's going to take care of us if they take us away?" Quinn's hand stilled on the spatula. "Who told you that?" "I heard you and Miss Patterson talking," Sarah admitted. "She said we need a lady to raise us proper." Quinn crouched down to her level. "Nobody is taking you anywhere, I promise you that, Sarah. You and Emma are staying right here with me." But even as he spoke the words, Quinn wasn't entirely sure he could keep that promise. The town council held considerable power, and if Nancy's report wasn't favorable enough, he might find himself fighting a legal battle he couldn't win. After breakfast with Emma on the mend, Quinn made a decision. He hitched the wagon and helped the girls into the back. "Where are we going, Uncle Quinn?" Sarah asked. "To town," Quinn replied. "There are some things we need." The first stop was the general store, where Quinn purchased fabric, thread, and buttons. He then went to the bookseller and bought several children's books and a volume on proper etiquette. Their final stop was the milliner's shop, where he awkwardly requested assistance in selecting appropriate bonnets for the girls. Mrs. Henderson, the milliner, was visibly surprised to see Quinn Rayburn in her shop. "Well, Mr. Rayburn, this is unexpected. What can I help you with today?" "The girls need proper hats," Quinn said, his discomfort evident. "And whatever else young ladies their age should have." Mrs. Henderson smiled warmly at the girls. "Let's see what we can find for these beautiful young ladies." An hour later, they left the shop with not only bonnets, but also hair ribbons, gloves, and advice on how to properly dress young girls for various occasions. Quinn felt the weight of his coin purse significantly lightened, but the delight on his nieces' faces was worth every penny. Their last stop was the schoolhouse, where Quinn hesitated before knocking on the door during the lunch recess. Nancy answered, surprise evident on her face at seeing him and the girls. "Mr. Rayburn Quinn," she corrected herself. "Is everything all right? How is Emma feeling?" "Much better, thanks to your help," Quinn said. He cleared his throat. "I was wondering if you might consider giving me some advice." Nancy's eyebrows rose slightly. "Advice on raising girls," Quinn clarified, lowering his voice so the children playing in the yard couldn't overhear. "I know I'm not what they need, but I'm all they've got. I want to learn to do better by them." Nancy's expression softened. "That's admirable of you. I'd be happy to help however I can." "I thought maybe you could come to dinner tomorrow," Quinn suggested, removing his hat and turning it nervously in his hands. "If that wouldn't be improper." "As an educational consultation, it would be entirely proper," Nancy replied with a small smile. "I accept your invitation." On the ride back to the ranch, Quinn's mind was occupied with plans. If he was to convince Nancy and by extension, the town council that he was capable of providing a proper home for his nieces, he needed to make some changes. For the rest of the day, Quinn worked tirelessly. He cleared out the small storage room off the main living area and transformed it into a proper parlor of sorts, moving in the piano that had belonged to Catherine but had sat untouched since her death. He hung curtains on the window's simple burlap, but better than nothing, and cleared away the various tools and ranch equipment that had accumulated around the house. That evening, after the girls were asleep, Quinn sat at the kitchen table with a needle and thread, attempting to sew a rip in one of Sarah's dresses. His large fingers were clumsy with the delicate work, and he pricked himself repeatedly, but he persisted until the tear was mended not prettily but securely. The following afternoon, Quinn found himself unusually nervous about Nancy's visit. He sent the girls to pick wildflowers for the table while he prepared a simple meal of venison stew and biscuits, one of the few dishes he could reliably cook well. When Nancy's buggy appeared on the horizon, Quinn straightened his best shirt and ran a hand through his freshly trimmed hair. He'd even shaved his usual stubble, revealing the full extent of the scar on his face that he typically kept half hidden. "You look different, Uncle Quinn," Sarah observed as they waited on the porch. "Better or worse?" Quinn asked. Sarah tilted her head thoughtfully. "Just different, but nice." Nancy arrived wearing a pretty blue dress rather than her usual practical teaching attire. She carried a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "I brought apple pie," she explained as Quinn helped her down from the buggy. "The girls mentioned it was their favorite." "You didn't have to do that," Quinn said, taking the basket. "I wanted to," Nancy replied, then noticed the changes to the house. "You've been busy," Quinn shrugged, "just tidying up a bit." Dinner went more smoothly than Quinn had anticipated. The girls were on their best behavior, using the table manners he had hastily attempted to teach them that morning. Nancy graciously overlooked their occasional mistakes, instead praising their efforts. After dinner, Nancy insisted on helping with the dishes while the girls showed Quinn the daisy chains they had made earlier. "You've surprised me, Quinn," Nancy said as they worked side by side at the wash basin. "When I first met you, I would never have imagined you'd be so adaptable." "Necessity," Quinn replied. "When James and Catherine died, I had two choices: learn to be what the girls needed or let them go to strangers. No real choice at all." Nancy handed him a plate to dry. "It can't have been easy, coming back from war to find your brother gone and two children suddenly dependent on you." Quinn was silent for a moment. "War teaches you to shut everything away: feelings, fears, doubts. That served me well as a soldier, but it doesn't work with children. They need more than I know how to give." "Yet you're trying," Nancy observed. "That counts for a great deal." After the dishes were done, they moved to the newly created parlor where Sarah proudly showed Nancy her progress with letters. Quinn sat somewhat awkwardly in the corner, watching as Nancy patiently worked with both girls. There was a gentleness to her interactions that he envied, a natural ease that he couldn't seem to master no matter how hard he tried. When it came time for the girls to go to bed, Quinn excused himself to tuck them in while Nancy waited in the parlor. He helped them change into their nightgowns, listened to their prayers, and promised to check for monsters under the bed. "Uncle Quinn," Sarah whispered as he was about to leave, "are you going to marry Miss Patterson?" Quinn nearly stumbled in surprise. "What? No, of course not. She's just helping us out." "But she's nice," Emma chimed in sleepily. "And pretty. And she knows how to be a lady," Sarah added. "She could teach us." "That's enough, girls," Quinn said firmly. "Miss Patterson is our friend, that's all. Now go to sleep." When he returned to the parlor, Nancy was examining a framed photograph on the wall. James and Catherine on their wedding day, with Quinn standing stiffly beside his brother in his cavalry uniform. "You look so young here," Nancy commented. 22, Quinn replied. "Just before my last deployment." Nancy turned to face him. "The girls are remarkable children. You've done better than you think." Quinn shook his head. "They're remarkable despite me, not because of me. Sarah's practically raising Emma while trying to take care of me too." "She's trying to fill her mother's shoes," Nancy said gently. "It's common for children who have lost parents, but I noticed tonight that you're encouraging her to be a child instead." "I'm trying," Quinn admitted, "but there's so much I don't know about raising girls. They need things I can't provide: knowledge about becoming women, about society, about—" He trailed off, embarrassed. Nancy smiled. That's what community is for Quinn. No parent, not even a mother and father together, knows everything their children need. We rely on teachers, neighbors, friends. As she prepared to leave, Nancy paused at the door. "I'm impressed by the changes you've made, Quinn, but may I offer one piece of advice?" Quinn nodded. "Don't try to become someone you're not for the girls' sake. They need you the real you, with all your strength and even your roughness. Just tempered with the tenderness I've glimpsed today." After Nancy departed, Quinn sat alone on the porch, contemplating her words. The real him. He wasn't sure he knew who that was anymore. The war had changed him, hardened him. And then losing James, his only brother, his last remaining family, until the girls had further closed him off from others. In the weeks that followed, Nancy's visits became more frequent. She began coming 3 times a week officially to help with the girls' education, but Quinn sensed she genuinely enjoyed their company. The girls blossomed under her attention, and Quinn found himself looking forward to her visits more than he cared to admit. One afternoon, Nancy arrived to find Quinn teaching the girls to ride on a gentle old mare named Daisy. Sarah sat confidently in the saddle while Quinn led the horse around the corral, with Emma watching eagerly from the fence. "Well, this is a pleasant surprise," Nancy called as she approached. "I didn't realize riding lessons were part of today's curriculum." Quinn helped Sarah dismount before turning to Nancy. "Every child in Montana should know how to ride," he said, "even proper young ladies." "I quite agree," Nancy replied, setting down her basket. "In fact, I'm rather fond of riding myself, though I haven't had much opportunity since coming to Willow Creek." "You ride?" Quinn asked, surprised. "My father raised horses in Vermont," Nancy explained. "I practically grew up in the saddle." A slow smile spread across Quinn's face, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, softening his usual stern expression. "Would you care to demonstrate for the girls? Show them that ladies can be accomplished riders?" Nancy glanced down at her dress. "I'm hardly dressed for it." "I might have something that would work," Quinn offered, then hesitated. They were Catherine's riding clothes. Understanding flickered in Nancy's eyes. "If you're sure you don't mind." 20 minutes later, Nancy emerged from the house wearing Catherine's riding skirt and jacket, which fit her reasonably well. Quinn had saddled his own horse, a spirited bay gelding named Thunderbird. "He's beautiful," Nancy said, approaching the horse confidently. "Arabian blood." "Quarter horse with some Arabian good eye," Quinn replied, impressed. "He can be a handful." "I believe we'll get along just fine," Nancy said, accepting Quinn's help to mount. The girls watched in awe as Nancy expertly guided Thunderbird around the corral, eventually asking Quinn to open the gate so she could take him for a proper run across the open field beyond. Quinn and the girls stood at the fence, watching as she and the horse seemed to fly across the grassland, her hair coming loose from its pins and streaming behind her like a banner. "She rides like an angel," Sarah breathed. "Better than most men I know," Quinn admitted, surprised and somewhat captivated by this new side of the proper schoolteacher. When Nancy returned, her cheeks were flushed and her eyes bright with exhilaration. "Oh, I've missed that feeling. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity." As Quinn helped her dismount, their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, that they had misjudged each other from the beginning. The harvest festival approached rapidly. It was the biggest social event of the year in Willow Creek, with the entire community gathering to celebrate the end of the growing season before winter set in. For Quinn, it represented the deadline for Nancy's assessment of his fitness as a guardian. 3 days before the festival, Quinn rode into town alone to purchase new clothes for the girls. As he was leaving the general store, he overheard a conversation between 2 town councilmen. "Patterson seems to have softened her stance on the Rayburn situation," one was saying. "Last meeting, she actually defended his right to keep those girls." "Won't matter much," the other replied. "Judge Wilson already has the papers drawn up. After the festival, those children will go to the Millers. They've been wanting girls, and with 5 sons already, they know a thing or two about raising children." Quinn froze, his hand tightening on the package of fabric. The council had already made their decision, regardless of Nancy's assessment. The realization hit him like a physical blow. They'd never intended to give him a fair chance. He mounted his horse and rode hard for home, anger and betrayal burning in his chest. Had Nancy known? Had her visits, her help, her apparent friendship all been a ruse to make the transition easier when the time came to take the girls? By the time he reached the ranch, his anger had cooled into something harder and more determined. He would not lose his nieces without a fight. If necessary, he would take them and leave Montana altogether. The girls were excited about their new dresses for the festival, chattering happily as Quinn tried to focus on normal evening routines. After they were asleep, he began gathering supplies, food, clothing, money, anything they would need for a long journey. The next morning, Nancy arrived for her usual visit, unaware of what Quinn had overheard. She noticed immediately that something was wrong. "Quinn, is everything all right?" She asked as he met her at the door, his expression closed and cold. "The girls are doing their lessons," he said tersely. "I have work to do in the barn." Nancy caught his arm as he turned to leave. "What's happened? You seem upset." Quinn pulled free of her grip. "Were you ever going to tell me about Judge Wilson's papers? Or were you just going to let me bring the girls to the festival and watch as the Millers took them away?" Nancy's face paled. "What are you talking about? I heard the councilman yesterday," Quinn growled. "The decision's already made." "Your assessment was just for show." "That's not true," Nancy insisted. "I've been advocating for you at every meeting. The council was split, but no final decision had been made." "Save your lies for someone who'll believe them," Quinn said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I trusted you, Nancy. I let you into our lives, let the girls grow attached to you." "Quinn, please listen. I think you should leave," Quinn cut her off. "And don't come back. The girls will be saying goodbye to enough people as it is." Hurt flashed across Nancy's face. "You're planning to run." Quinn said nothing, but his silence was confirmation enough. "That's not the answer," Nancy said urgently. "If you run with them, you'll be hunted. The girls will live in fear, always looking over their shoulders. Is that the life you want for them?" "Better than being torn from the only family they have left," Quinn retorted. "Let me help you fight this properly," Nancy pleaded. "If what you heard is true, we still have until after the festival. Let me speak to Judge Wilson." Quinn studied her face, searching for any sign of deception. "Why would you help me? Your job was to evaluate whether I'm fit to raise them. Clearly, you've decided I'm not." "That's not true," Nancy said softly. "My reports have been increasingly favorable. I've told the council how much the girls love you, how hard you're trying to create a proper home for them. And yet the papers are drawn up," Quinn said bitterly. "Some members of the council have their own agendas," Nancy admitted. "The Millers have influence and they've wanted a daughter for years. But nothing is finalized until the judge signs those papers, and he won't do that without a hearing." Quinn wanted to believe her, but trust didn't come easily to him. "Prove it," he said finally. "Prove you're on our side." Nancy held his gaze steadily. "Come to town with me right now. We'll go to Judge Wilson together and request a formal hearing. If I'm lying, you'll know immediately." After arranging for Mrs. Jensen from the neighboring farm to watch the girls, Quinn and Nancy rode to town in tense silence. At the judge's office, Nancy requested an immediate meeting, her typically gentle demeanor replaced with firm determination. Judge Wilson, a gray-haired man with spectacles perched on his nose, seemed surprised to see them together. "Miss Patterson, Mr. Rayburn, what can I do for you today?" "I understand you have custody papers prepared regarding the Rayburn girls," Nancy said without preamble. "I'm here to formally object to any change in their guardianship without a proper hearing." The judge glanced between them. "I see. And you're aware, Miss Patterson, that your assessment was meant to inform this decision." "My assessment isn't complete until after the Harvest Festival," Nancy replied firmly. "And based on my observations thus far, I believe separating the girls from their uncle would be detrimental to their well-being." Quinn stood silently, watching this exchange with growing realization. Nancy hadn't betrayed him. She was fighting for him for them. Judge Wilson removed his spectacles, polishing them thoughtfully. "The council has made a recommendation, but you're correct that no final decision has been made without a hearing." He looked at Quinn. "Mr. Rayburn, are you prepared to make your case for retaining guardianship?" "Yes, sir," Quinn replied firmly. Those girls are my blood, my responsibility. I may not be perfect, but I love them and they belong with me. The judge nodded slowly. Very well. A formal hearing will be held the Monday after the Harvest Festival. Both sides will present their arguments, and I will rule based on the evidence and the best interests of the children. As they left the courthouse, Quinn felt a weight both lifting and settling more firmly on his shoulders. He had a real chance, but he would have to convince the judge that a former cavalry officer with a reputation for violence could provide a proper home for two young girls. Thank you, he said quietly as they walked to their horses. I misjudged you? Nancy shook her head. You had reason to be suspicious. This town hasn't always treated you fairly. She paused. The hearing will be difficult. The Millers are respected with a stable home and a mother to raise the girls. What chance do I have? Quinn asked bluntly. Nancy looked him directly in the eyes. A real one, if you'll let me help you prepare. The judge needs to see the man I've come to know these past weeks, not the rough cowboy the town gossips about. On the ride back to the ranch, they discussed strategy. Nancy suggested having character witnesses speak on Quinn's behalf, neighbors who had seen his dedication to the girls, perhaps the doctor who had observed his concern during Emma's illness. And the girls themselves, Quinn added. Surely their wishes matter. They should, Nancy agreed, though the judge may feel they're too young to decide what's best for them. As they approached the ranch, Quinn had a thought. Nancy, would you consider speaking for me at the hearing? Your opinion as the school teacher might carry weight. Nancy was quiet for a moment. Quinn, there's something you should know. The council appointed me to assess your fitness as a guardian because I'm new to town and supposedly impartial, but if I speak on your behalf, they may question my objectivity. Because you've become friends with the girls. That and? Nancy hesitated, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. Some in town have noticed my frequent visits to your ranch. There have been implications about my interest being more than professional. Quinn's eyebrows rose. Implications about us? Nancy nodded, clearly embarrassed. Mrs. Henderson asked me quite directly last week if there was an understanding between us. I assured her our relationship was purely in the interests of the children, but if you speak for me at the hearing, they'll assume otherwise, Quinn finished. It could undermine my testimony, Nancy admitted. However, I'm willing to take that risk if you feel it would help. They parted at the ranch with an agreement to meet again the following day to continue preparations for the hearing. As Quinn watched her buggy disappear down the road, he found himself contemplating her words about the town's gossip. The thought of being linked romantically with Nancy should have irritated him, but instead, he found it didn't bother him at all. That evening, as Quinn was helping the girls prepare for bed, Sarah asked a question that caught him off guard. Uncle Quinn, do you keep Mama's things somewhere? I want to remember what she looked like. Quinn hesitated. He had packed away James and Catherine's personal belongings months ago, finding it too painful to look at them daily. Yes, in the trunk in my room. Would you like to see some of her things? Both girls nodded eagerly. Quinn led them to his Spartan bedroom and pulled out a large wooden trunk from under the bed. Inside were carefully folded dresses, a jewelry box containing Catherine's few pieces, letters James and Catherine had written to each other, and a family Bible with births and deaths recorded in James's neat handwriting. As the girls reverently touched their mother's possessions, Quinn reached into the very bottom of the trunk and withdrew a small wooden box he had carved himself. I've been saving these for when you're older, he said, opening the box to reveal 2 satin ribbons, one pink, one blue. Your mother wore these in her hair on her wedding day. One day when you're grown and get married, I thought you might want to wear them too. Sarah's eyes widened. You kept them for us all this time? Quinn nodded, suddenly feeling self-conscious about the sentimentality of the gesture. Your father asked me to look after them before he died, said they were for your wedding days. Emma gently touched the blue ribbon. It's so pretty. Can we see you wear it, Uncle Quinn? Sarah asked with a mischievous smile. Like a lady, despite himself, Quinn chuckled. I don't think it would suit me, Pumpkin. Please, Emma begged, her eyes wide and pleading. Unable to resist their hopeful faces, Quinn awkwardly tied the blue ribbon around a lock of his dark hair, feeling ridiculous but rewarded by the girls' delighted giggles. "Now you look like a lady," Emma declared, clapping her hands. "The prettiest lady in all of Montana," Quinn agreed with mock seriousness, which sent the girls into further peals of laughter. The sound of a horse approaching outside interrupted their moment of levity. Quinn removed the ribbon hastily, tucking it back into the box. "Stay here," he instructed, reaching for the rifle he kept mounted above the door. He moved cautiously to the front door, weapon ready, then relaxed when he recognized Nancy's buggy returning. Setting the rifle aside, he stepped onto the porch. "Nancy, did you forget something?" She climbed down quickly, looking troubled. "I've just come from town. Quinn, the hearing has been moved up. It's scheduled for the morning after the Harvest Festival, not Monday, as the judge said." "Why the change?" Quinn asked, instantly alert. "Judge Wilson was called to Helena on urgent business. He'll only be in town through Saturday morning." Nancy wrung her hands. "This gives us even less time to prepare." As they discussed this new development, neither noticed Sarah and Emma watching curiously from the bedroom doorway, nor did they see Sarah's eyes fix on the wooden box Quinn had left open on his bed, the ribbons partially visible. The day of the Harvest Festival dawned clear and crisp, with the first hint of autumn in the air. Quinn dressed with unusual care in his best shirt and the new vest he'd purchased in town. The girls wore their new dresses, with Sarah insisting on styling Emma's hair herself. "You both look beautiful," Quinn told them as they prepared to leave. "Remember, today is about having fun. Don't worry about tomorrow." But as they rode toward town, Quinn couldn't help but wonder if this would be their last festival together as a family. He had followed Nancy's advice, gathering letters from neighbors attesting to his care of the girls, arranging for Dr. Walker to speak about his dedication during Emma's illness, and preparing his own statement about why the girls should remain with him. Still, doubt gnawed at him. The Millers were a respected family with a comfortable home and a stable environment. How could a bachelor with a war-scarred past compete with that? The town square had been transformed for the festival, with harvest decorations adorning every building. Tables laden with food lined one side, while a platform had been erected for dancing and performances. Children ran about playing games, and a band was setting up their instruments for the evening's dancing. As they arrived, Quinn immediately noticed the Millers George and Martha with their 5 boisterous sons watching the girls with undisguised interest. Martha Miller nudged her husband and whispered something as Quinn helped his nieces from the wagon. "Uncle Quinn, can we go see the cake contest?" Sarah asked, pointing to a display of elaborately decorated cakes. "Stay together and don't wander off," Quinn cautioned, watching as they hurried toward the cakes. "They look lovely," Nancy's voice came from behind him. He turned to find her wearing a pretty green dress he hadn't seen before, her hair arranged in a more elaborate style than her usual teaching attire. "So do you," Quinn replied before he could stop himself. Nancy smiled, a faint blush touching her cheeks. "Thank you. Are you ready for tomorrow?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Quinn said grimly, his eyes tracking the girls as they moved through the crowd. "The Millers are here. They've been watching the girls since we arrived." Nancy followed his gaze. "Try not to worry about them today. This festival is for the girls to enjoy." Throughout the morning, Quinn did his best to ensure the girls experienced everything the festival had to offer: the games, the food, the music. He was acutely aware of the townspeople's scrutiny, some watching with sympathy, others with judgment. Around midday, Mayor Henderson called for everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, as is our tradition, the children will now present their harvest performances." The town's children had prepared songs, recitations, and small plays to entertain the crowd. Quinn was surprised when Sarah tugged at his hand. "Uncle Quinn, Emma and I want to sing in the performances," she whispered. "You do? When did you practice?" Quinn asked, confused. "Miss Patterson helped us," Sarah explained. "It's a surprise for you." Before Quinn could respond, the girls were hurrying toward the stage, joining a group of other children. Nancy appeared at his side, looking slightly nervous. "I hope you don't mind," she said. They wanted to surprise you. When it was their turn, Sarah and Emma stepped forward together. Sarah announced in a clear voice, "We're going to sing Beautiful Dreamer for our Uncle Quinn, who takes care of us and loves us very much." Quinn felt a lump form in his throat as the girls began to sing, their sweet voices carrying across the suddenly quiet square. They weren't perfect. Emma missed a few words, and their timing was occasionally off, but the simple purity of their performance brought tears to the eyes of many in the audience. When they finished, the crowd erupted in applause. Quinn found himself blinking back, unexpected moisture in his eyes as the girls ran back to him. "Did you like it, Uncle Quinn?" Emma asked anxiously. Unable to speak, Quinn knelt and gathered them both in his arms, holding them tightly. Over their shoulders, he caught Nancy's eye, mouthing a silent thank you. As the day progressed into evening, lanterns were lit around the square and the band began playing for dancing. Quinn sat with Dr. Walker, watching as Nancy led the girls in a simple dance with other children. "You've done well with them, Rayburn," the doctor commented. "Better than most expected." "Not well enough, apparently," Quinn replied, nodding toward the judge who was deep in conversation with George Miller. "The hearing isn't decided yet," Dr. Walker reminded him. "And for what it's worth, I'll be speaking on your behalf. Those girls have thrived under your care despite the challenges." As the evening wore on, Quinn was surprised when Martha Miller approached him directly. "Mr. Rayburn," she greeted him with a tight smile. "Your nieces are lovely children." "Thank you," Quinn replied cautiously. Martha glanced toward where the girls were now sitting with Nancy, enjoying slices of apple pie. "My husband and I want you to know that if the judge rules in our favor tomorrow, we'll ensure the girls are well cared for." "They'll want for nothing," Quinn's jaw tightened. "Except their family," Martha's smile faltered. "Mr. Rayburn, we understand your attachment to the children, but surely you must see that a proper family with a mother's influence would be better for them in the long run." "They have a family, Mrs. Miller," Quinn said evenly. "And they have a woman's influence in Miss Patterson who has been kind enough to help with their education and upbringing. Yes, we've noticed Miss Patterson's interest in your situation," Martha replied, her tone implying more than her words. "However, a teacher's occasional visits hardly compare to a mother's constant presence." Before Quinn could respond, he spotted Sarah running toward him, her face alight with excitement. "Uncle Quinn." "It's time for the special dance," she exclaimed, grabbing his hand. "Miss Nancy says you have to dance with her." Martha Miller raised an eyebrow but said nothing as Sarah pulled Quinn away. Nancy was waiting at the edge of the dance floor, looking somewhat embarrassed. "The girls insisted," she explained. "But of course you don't have to, I'd be honored," Quinn interrupted, offering his arm with more gallantry than he felt. Dancing wasn't something he'd done since before the war. As they joined other couples on the floor, Quinn placed his hand awkwardly at Nancy's waist. "I should warn you, I'm not much of a dancer." "Just follow my lead," Nancy replied with a smile. "I won't tell anyone." As they moved to the music, Quinn gradually relaxed, finding the rhythm easier than he'd remembered. Nancy was a good partner, subtly guiding him when necessary without making it obvious to onlookers. "The girls did wonderfully today," Nancy said softly. "Everyone was impressed." "Thanks to you," Quinn acknowledged. "You've been good for them, Nancy, better than I deserved after how I treated you initially." Nancy's eyes met his. "You were protecting your family, I respect that." She paused. "Quinn, whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that I believe you're a good man and a good guardian to those girls." The sincerity in her voice touched something deep within him. "That means a lot coming from you." As the dance ended, Quinn became aware of whispers and glances from townspeople around them. The Millers were watching with disapproving expressions, while Judge Wilson observed thoughtfully from his seat near the mayor. The girls ran up to them as they left the dance floor, Emma tugging at Quinn's hand. "Uncle Quinn, we have a surprise. Sarah, show him." Sarah reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out the 2 ribbons from the wooden box, the ones Catherine had worn on her wedding day. Quinn stared in confusion. "How did you—" "We took them from the box," Sarah admitted, "but it's for a good reason." She turned to the crowd that had gathered around them and spoke in a clear, carrying voice that surprised Quinn with its confidence. "Everyone says our Uncle Quinn is too rough to raise us because he's not a lady," she announced, causing a ripple of uncomfortable laughter from the adults nearby. "But he keeps these ribbons safe for us because they were our mama's. He's saving them for our wedding days." She held up the ribbons for everyone to see, and sometimes when we're sad and miss our mama, he even wears them to make us laugh. She demonstrated by attempting to tie the pink ribbon around a lock of her own hair. "See, he does lady things for us because he loves us." A hush fell over the onlookers. Quinn felt his face flush with embarrassment, yet he couldn't bring himself to stop Sarah as she continued. "We don't want to live with the Millers," she declared, looking directly at Judge Wilson. "We want to stay with Uncle Quinn. He's our family." Emma nodded vigorously beside her sister. "He checks for monsters and makes the best flapjacks," she added solemnly. Quinn knelt down to their level, gently taking the ribbons from Sarah's hand. "Those were meant to be a surprise for your wedding days, not for the whole town to see," he said softly. "But everyone needs to know you can take care of us," Sarah insisted. "Miss Nancy says sometimes people don't see what's right in front of them." Quinn glanced up at Nancy, who looked both mortified and touched by the girls' display. The crowd around them had grown, and he could hear murmurs of both support and criticism. Judge Wilson stepped forward, adjusting his spectacles. "Young ladies, while I appreciate your enthusiasm, the decision about your guardianship will be made in court tomorrow, not at the festival." "But that's not fair," Sarah protested. "Nobody asked us what we want." The judge looked taken aback by her outburst, then his expression softened slightly. "Very well, Miss Rayburn. Consider yourselves asked. What do you want?" Sarah's hand found Quinn's, her small fingers gripping tightly. "We want to stay with Uncle Quinn. He's teaching us to be brave and strong like our papa was, and Miss Nancy helps with the lady things." Emma nodded in agreement. "Uncle Quinn saved these ribbons," she added, pointing to the satin strips in Quinn's hand. "He keeps all the important things safe." Judge Wilson studied the scene before him, Quinn kneeling beside his nieces, the ribbons in his hand, Nancy standing protectively nearby. Something in his expression shifted. "Mr. Rayburn," he said finally, "it seems your nieces have made quite a compelling case on your behalf. I believe I've seen enough to make my decision without the formality of tomorrow's hearing, if all parties agree." George Miller stepped forward, his wife beside him. "Judge Wilson, surely you're not suggesting, I'm suggesting, Mr. Miller, that the welfare of these children might best be served by respecting their clearly stated wishes, especially when their guardian has demonstrated such dedication." The judge turned back to Quinn. "Mr. Rayburn, I believe these young ladies belong with you. I'll have the papers drawn up confirming your permanent guardianship." A cheer went up from many in the crowd, while others looked disappointed or confused. Quinn stood slowly, hardly able to believe what he'd heard. "Thank you, Your Honor," he managed to say. The girls threw their arms around him, nearly knocking him off balance with their enthusiasm. Over their heads, Quinn's eyes met Nancy's, seeing in them a joy that matched his own. As the crowd dispersed and the festival continued around them, Quinn found a moment alone with Nancy. "I had nothing to do with their ribbon plan," she assured him, still looking slightly mortified, "though I did encourage them to speak their minds if given the opportunity." Quinn chuckled. "They certainly did that." He looked down at the ribbons still in his hand. "I suppose the whole town will now picture me with ribbons in my hair." "A small price to pay for keeping your family together," Nancy observed with a smile. Quinn nodded, suddenly serious. "Nancy, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. Without your help, you would have found another way," Nancy said confidently. "You're more resourceful than you give yourself credit for, Quinn Rayburn." Quinn studied her face in the lantern light, seeing beyond the proper schoolteacher to the woman who had fought for him and the girls, who had seen worth in him when others saw only roughness and scars. "Nancy," he said hesitantly, "now that the custody matter is settled, would it be improper to ask if you might continue your visits to the ranch? Not for the girls' education, but for other reasons." Nancy's eyes widened slightly. "What other reasons did you have in mind, Mr. Rayburn?" "Well, Quinn said, uncharacteristically nervous. "I thought perhaps you might enjoy more rides on Thunderbird, and I'm told my coffee is passable if not my baking." A slow smile spread across Nancy's face. "I believe that would be entirely proper, especially if we were to inform the town council of our friendship." "Friendship," Quinn repeated, a hint of disappointment in his voice. Nancy's smile turned mischievous. "To start with at least, I do believe in proper courtship, Mr. Rayburn." Quinn's heart quickened at the implication. "I'd be honored to court you properly, Miss Patterson, if you'd allow it." Before she could respond, the girls came rushing back, demanding that Quinn join them for the final dance of the evening. As he allowed them to pull him away, he cast one last glance at Nancy, who nodded with a promise in her eyes. 3 months later, as winter settled over Montana, the Double R Ranch looked markedly different. Curtains hung in every window, a proper parlor had been established, and the sounds of a piano could often be heard in the evenings as Nancy taught the girls to play. Quinn stood on the porch, watching as Nancy's buggy approached through the gently falling snow. The girls were inside, putting final touches on decorations for Christmas, their first as a permanent family. As he helped Nancy down from her buggy, Quinn marveled at how much had changed. The town that had once whispered about his unsuitability now largely approved of his guardianship, especially as they witnessed his courtship of their respected schoolteacher. "The girls are beside themselves with excitement," Quinn told her as they walked toward the house. "Sarah's been counting the days until you arrive," Nancy smiled, her cheeks pink from the cold. "And what about their uncle? Has he been counting the days as well?" Quinn stopped, turning to face her. "Every minute," he admitted. "Nancy, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." Nancy's eyes softened. "Yes, Quinn." Reaching into his pocket, Quinn withdrew a small box. "I know it's only been 3 months, and perhaps this is too soon, but..." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring with a small pearl. "I can't imagine our lives without you in it. The girls need you." "I need you?" Nancy's eyes filled with tears as Quinn dropped to one knee in the snow. "Nancy Patterson, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, of helping me raise these girls and building a life together?" "Yes," Nancy whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Quinn Rayburn, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, the front door burst open and the girls rushed out, unable to contain their excitement any longer. They threw themselves at Nancy, showering her with hugs and questions about the wedding. "Did you see?" Sarah asked, her eyes bright. "Uncle Quinn used Mama's ribbon to tie the ring box." Nancy looked down at the box still in Quinn's hand, noticing for the first time the blue satin ribbon wrapped around it. Her eyes met Quinn's over the girls' heads. "You've been saving it all this time," she said softly. Quinn nodded. "James always said these ribbons were for the most important women in our lives. I can't think of anyone more important than you." That evening, as they sat before the fire in the parlor, the girls finally asleep in their room, Nancy rested her head on Quinn's shoulder. "You ever think about how different things might have been if the town council hadn't appointed me to check on the girls?" she asked. Quinn considered the question. "I was so angry when you first started coming around. All I could see was someone trying to take my family away. And now," Nancy prompted. "Now I see that you were sent here to complete our family," Quinn replied, kissing the top of her head. "The girls needed a mother's love, and he hesitated, still unaccustomed to expressing his feelings openly. "And you," Nancy encouraged gently. "I needed someone brave enough to look past the scars and the roughness," Quinn admitted. "Someone who could see what I kept hidden." Nancy reached for his hand, her fingers entwining with his. "Not so hidden anymore. You're going to be a wonderful father to those girls, Quinn. You already are." "We're going to be wonderful parents," Quinn corrected, squeezing her hand. "Together." As they sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire's glow, Quinn reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a man everyone believed too rough to raise young girls to a man looking forward to building a family with the woman he loved, he had learned that sometimes the things kept hidden, like satin ribbons and a capacity for tenderness, were the most important things of all. And as the snow fell gently outside, blanketing the Montana landscape in pristine white, Quinn Rayburn knew with absolute certainty that he had found exactly where he belonged, not alone in his roughness, but surrounded by the love of three remarkable women who had seen in him what he had never seen in himself.